Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm doing these Friday afternoon, so right on time, so I'm pretty sure all of the questions are probably in. I think I missed a few last week. And also, it looks like there's only questions on Patreon this time, but just a reminder that I follow the questions on every single service, so I'm not like intentionally skipping one or anything. But anyway, let's jump right in. First up, Nolan wanted to know where they could buy a Powerbase Mini FM for the Genesis, which is an adapter that allows you to use Sega Master System games on a Genesis, but also includes an FM sound chip so that you're able to get the FM audio on those Master System games that are compatible. And it looked like Monty Green already beat me to the answer. I believe Castlemania will be selling these at some point. I don't think Stone Age Gamer is selling them anymore. And I'll definitely post about it once Ryan gets them up on Castlemania, because I'm a big fan of that adapter. I actually think Kevtris still has mine. I gotta get that back from him at some point. He borrowed it to make sure that it worked fine with the Mega SG, which of course it did. So, but yeah, I'll have a post on it when Castlemania starts selling them. And it is, I think it's the only way to use original carts on a Genesis and be able to get the FM audio without doing some crazy mod yourself. Jason Guffey had two questions, and I actually just started answering this and then changed my mind halfway through about how I wanted to answer it. So here's attempt number 2. First, in the easiest question, does SVideo only support 240p, or is there such a thing as 480i or 480p via SVideo? So SVideo and Composite only support 15 kilohertz signals, and both 240p and 480i are 15 kilohertz signals. And to a CRT, they look essentially the same, which is why in games like Chrono Cross or Dino Crisis on the PS1, when you press start to enter the menu, that's 480i. You press start again, that's 240p. There's zero delay because to a CRT, it's the same thing, whereas to a flat panel, it's a different resolution. There is no support for 480p over SVideo or Composite ever, though, so it's only for 15 kilohertz signals. And to your other question, that's a bit more complicated. They just got a PVM that only supports up to SVideo and want to work it into their existing setup, which either output RGB over SCART or component via HD RetroVision cables, and some have HDMI. So what you're going to want to get there is some kind of converter that goes to SVideo. And the ones out from LinuxBot 3000, I have that one, happen to have that one sitting right here. There's also one from AshenWorks that I have over there. And there was that open source one from Mike Chi. They all, as far as the limited testing that I've done with them, they all work fine over SVideo, but have issues over Composite, which is why full reviews of all of these things haven't come out yet. And I don't think it's an issue with these devices at all. I'm pretty sure it's an issue with the signal itself, and without getting too technical, it's something that may or may not ever be solved on an analog to analog converter. Now, there certainly might be in the future an HDMI to Composite component and SVideo converter, maybe even RGB out there that would take things that's 240p over HDMI. So the Mister, Raspberry Pis, basically anything that could do that and convert it to signals, and that would work over all of them. But that's not what you're asking. You're just asking for how to get it to SVideo. And the choices that you would have would be to run that into one of these boxes, which I believe only takes RGB. You could probably get creative and run them into a GBS control, which would also convert component to this to RGB, and then have it just set it to pass-through mode, so that way you could have component into the GBS and then just go right into this to get out SVideo. Or for the HDMI consoles, if you're outputting 480p, you could also use the GBS control to downscale that to 240p. You would just have to figure out the input situation on the GBS control, because then you'd have to deal with HDMI converted to either component or RGB or VGA, I guess, and then plus your RGB inputs and plus your component. So that's something you're going to have to figure out based on the total setup that you have. But basically, once however you figure out your switching scenario, grab one of these converters and you should be able to go to SVideo without any problems whatsoever. And I would just check out the features on all of them. Do you want just a basic converter? Check out the LinuxBot. Do you want one with multiple outputs and multiple uses? Check out both the AshenWorks one and the open source one from Mike. And as for the open source one, Are you able to solder your own stuff together? Do you enjoy projects like that? Maybe that one's the best for you. But overall, I would check out those options and kind of decide where you're going from there. And everything's totally doable. The only thing you're just going to have to decide is how you switch between all of these. Scanline City wants to know what the best device to use inside arcade JAMA cabs to clean or regenerate sync. That is both a good question and a complicated question. What are your sources and why do you need to regenerate them are the really important factors here. So if you're simply talking about, I want to try to feed RGBS signals to an arcade cabinet in order to get just consoles on an arcade machine, I would look into Tim Worthington's devices, especially the stuff that he just released within the past year, and that should take care of absolutely everything that you need. However, if you're just talking about getting an arcade board to work better inside an arcade machine, I've never had issues with sync in that regard. I don't have a ton of experience. I think most of the New York crew would probably have more experience than me. Same thing with people like Scarlet Sprites. There's a whole bunch more that have really hands-on experience with this. But in my limited use, the only issues that I've ever had with arcade machines are making sure that you're using JAMA. And if it's not, you have to get those converters to convert the arcade board to JAMA. So if your question's involving consoles to arcade machines, check out Tim Worthington's stuff and check out the post on RetroRGB. I think it was within the last year, and I'm pretty sure Ronnie wrote it, and it has all of Tim's products categorized in there. And if I misunderstood your question, please re-ask it, and I'll get to it next week. Oliver Menard had more information on that super screen TV they talked about, and it seems to be a tri-tube all-in-one rear projection TV. So that's pretty much going to be the same as any CRT rear projection TV. By the time I started to pay attention to those, they were all like DLP rear projection. And I wasn't ever really impressed with the quality of the ones I used. Now, I did see at trade shows some pretty freaking spectacular ones, but the one that stood out in my mind the most, there was a 70-inch Sony for $12,000 at the time. That was really cool. And then I think the year later, plasma TVs got to be higher quality and for, a quarter of the price. So I never really went down the road of rear projection TVs, and especially not CRT. And I do remember all of the old CRT projection TVs saying don't use video games with it because you could get burned in and stuff like that. So I don't know how relevant that is, especially when, it's retro gaming. So you're probably not going to be using this thing as much as a normal TV in a normal household where you probably, especially back in the day, you'd turn it on when you go home from work and it would be, used all the time. I think the chances for burn-in might be different if you're just playing it every now and then. But I don't really have too much to offer other than it should be zero lag, and you should be able to still play light gun games on it. So sorry that I'm kind of useless on this one, but hey, if you end up picking one up, do some experiments and let me know what you find. Mark Main said they're trying to convert their setup from pulling out individual consoles to being all automatic. So there's 3 questions. Number 1, do you know of a safe way to get 2 SVideo outputs? Can I split RCA audio lines with a Y cable, or is that unsafe for consoles as well? They have an SVideo PVM and a RetroTink for their setup. So I'll give the short version, but if you want the longer version, please watch the video I did with Steve about testing audio on an oscilloscope. But you can use Y cables for audio on consoles, and that's both for splitting the signal to 2 different outputs, as well as things like mono audio output from an NES or Master System through a Y cable to a stereo connector so that you can get it through both speakers. That is safe. It is never safe to use Y cables with video signals. Once again, check out that video for more. Actually, both the scope videos I did with Steve would be excellent descriptions of all of this, but they're pretty lengthy and they get into a lot of detail. So that's just the basic answer. To split SVideo signals, you would need some kind of distribution device. You could look into older Extron equipment, and basically, I think the best way to go about doing this is to try to find any older higher end equipment that's now super cheap on eBay. So, and also don't overlook things that only have BNC inputs, because a lot of them accept YC just through splitters. In fact, I think I have one right here. Haha. So here's like an SVideo to YC BNC adapter. It's funny. My desk over here is actually 2 stacks of plastic drawers with a table on, like a table on top of it. So that's why I'm always able to pull this random crap out when I'm talking about it. So yeah, I would look into that and just see what's the easiest thing for your overall solution, as well as maybe using some kind of Extron crosspoint with multiple inputs and outputs to handle all of this stuff. Question 2, are there any other high-quality automatic component switches other than the G-Comp? They went on the alternative switches page and didn't find much. Yeah, what I just mentioned, the Extron crosspoints, multiple input, multiple output, and if I'm remembering correctly, you're definitely going to want to double-check the data sheets, but each one of those BNC inputs could accept RGB, VGA, component video, SVideo, and even composite. You just have to make sure to plug them into their relevant ports. And you would need the BNC converters, which, depending on your setup, might actually end up being way more expensive than getting the G-Comp switch. But just look at it from a total point of view and see what you got. Also, I think you might be able to use basically the same adapter I just showed to split SVideo and use that through the G-Comp, but overall you're kind of just going to have to evaluate your whole setup. Lastly, I don't do any streaming or anything extreme, just looking for a good SCART switch with dual outputs, so one could go to my modded CRT and the other one could go to my 4K TV. It seems the only choice is either the Hydra or the G-Scarc. There's only a $40 difference, but I don't want to spend it for features I'm not going to use. Which would you recommend? Well, like I said in the SCART switch shootout video, my opinion is biased, but I would always recommend the G-Scarc switch. And that's mostly because of how long it's been out and how many people have tested that. Especially the people I know that use these in really harsh environments. I mean, constantly throwing them in backpacks, going back and forth to different tournaments, and they get really beat up, and they all still work as long as you don't feed it a bad signal, of course. But even the newer ones, with every revision, Super G puts more protection in, which, you know, it shouldn't be up to him to protect the Switch against bad stuff, but he's still putting it in there to make them safer to use. So I would always go with the G-Scarc if you're looking for dual output and extra features. And while I've heard the Hydras have gotten better, I've had really bad luck with the 2 only that I tested. So it's, you know, I can't speak for the newer ones. Maybe they're all fine now, but it just seems like if you're going to invest all of this money in a setup and you're going to be spending a lot of money on different cables and anything else, you might want to really think about getting good quality stuff, or just go the opposite and grab the basic otaku switch, the manual switch, not automatic with single output. But I think for your setup, it sounds like looking into a Extron crosspoint and getting a bunch of BNC adapters, either for component, SVideo, and SCART. I think I would look into that first and see what the total price is for that. And if it's the same as getting a G-Comp and a G-Scarc and a couple of adapters for SVideo as well, then maybe it's worth it to go through. And also, depending on your setup, you might even want to put SVideo through a Core U transcoder into the G-Comp switch. But I think price should be the deciding factor. It just would be a full crosspoint setup with all of the adapters, which the adapters are going to cost way more than the crosspoint, or the G-Comp and G-Scarc, and possibly even Core U with the correct cables to do that. And of course, what cables you already own would be a factor in that. So I would let price decide and kind of think of your whole setup. Kelv SYC said, a lot of Nintendo consoles typically have proprietary power adapters, and for the N64, it seems the traditional power brick is intended to form part of the body of the console. With failing or inefficient power bricks a possible concern as they age, I wonder if there's been any community efforts to have a more modern power brick for the N64 that works on all models, can work with a barrel jack adapter, or even USB-C. So I don't know of one, but I think that's an excellent idea. I would love to see somebody design an N64 adapter that's just a DC to DC converter that allows you to take a triad power supply, and just that way you could use it worldwide. You buy the triad for whatever region you have, and you just plug it right into this. I think that would be incredible. I think Laser Bear could probably 3D print the cases needed for them. It just would take somebody with a lot of knowledge of power circuits. And I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I have had so many bad experiences with improperly built power circuits, not just in retro gaming. And in one of the other jobs I had where I worked on part of the design team as well. And I learned the hard way how easy just one very small mistake could completely just destroy a project. And even stuff where everything seems to work okay, you could have issues that start to show up months down the line. And then because everything's been working so well, up until this point, the power supply is usually one of the last things you look at. So I'm very nervous about power supplies. I guess that's just the best way. And, it's nervous because of actual experience, not some imaginary fear I have or something like that. So while I would love to see something like that done, I wouldn't be comfortable talking about it unless it got evaluated by many different people in the retro gaming scene, all with extensive knowledge in power supplies that would sign it off and give it their blessing. And then, of course, there would always be you got to make sure that you use a good quality AC to DC to go into it. And if you just buy a cheap one for $5 and plug it in, there's no telling what that's going to do. For the short term, though, I'm pretty sure you could recap the N64 power supply, and it's got a self-healing fuse in there too. So you might even want to replace that, and it should breathe new life into that power supply, and it should fix most issues. But I agree, I would love to see a project like that. I just would love to see it done right and done very cautiously. Obed Samuel wants to know if I could recommend a Scarc cable to connect their G-Scarc switch to their OSSC. Yes, one of these. As long as your cable management is fine, this Scarc coupler would probably be the best solution. When I say cable management, I'll have a video out on this fairly soon. But, if everything is stacked properly, so all the weight just goes straight down, it's fine. But if your cable's pulling it on one side and it's pulling on the switch, that's bad for the pins. But definitely, I love these things. They've been delayed forever. They were supposed to have been released a million years ago, and now it's down to the days, I believe. I think we're days away from I don't know if it's pre-orders or if they're just going to open right for sale. So if you could wait another week or two at the most, I would hope. I can get more info on it. And of course, I'll post about it and talk about it. If you want something to hold you off, Amazon has those Cable Direct, and that's KABELDIREKT. They're all right. They're not great, but they're cheap, and they're available and shipped from Amazon. So if you want something right now that also you could use as a backup, and in fact, I even got a 15-footer. For this exact reason, in fact, I was waiting on fully shielded ones from Retro Access, so I just picked up the Amazon one. It arrived the next day, and I used it. It was all right, but on occasion, I'll need to run a really long cable, never for capture or anything, because you always want the shortest possible if you're doing captures, but sometimes I just needed to hook some stuff up to make sure that some things worked, and it was really awesome that I had a cheap, long Scarc cable that I was able to just go, all right, cool, everything's working, put it back. It was absolutely worth a $15-20 or something. So if you want a short-term solution, that's fine. I would probably just keep it in your mind that you're going to want to upgrade at some point. And of course, the fully shielded coax ones from Retro Access are great. I just know that they're always swamped and back ordered. So, depending on your needs, if you want something 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet away, that might actually be the best solution. And you could even specify length. But overall, I love the Scarc coupler idea. As long as everything's cable managed properly and you're not pulling this so it's not putting pressure on the sides of the switch, it actually works out really well. And this was designed with the exact height of the OSSC in mind. You'll see in the video whenever that finally airs. Joaquin Coelho wants to know if full motion video skipping is still expected on a PlayStation SCPH 1001 with the X Station on it. So I don't think you could install an X Station into a 1001. I think you need like a 55 series or even some of the 7000 series. So I'm pretty sure that's not going to be a scenario that works at all, at least at the moment. They would have to come out with a completely different, at least installation guide for it. But to continue the question, Joaquin knows that the issue plagued the early models, but not sure if it comes from the CD assembly or the chipset. If it comes from the former, an optical drive emulation would solve it. So yeah, I think that's probably why you haven't found any answers, is because as far as I'm remembering, I could get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure the X-Station is not compatible with the SEPH 1001. The SIO might be, though. So I would check the SIO forums and see if that's an issue, if that's the console that you definitely want to use it on. But yeah, that's probably why you haven't found any X-Station info on it. A couple of questions from Juan Pablo. First, they want to know if there are any easy places to get something like the Splitfire, which is a device that outputs, you put JAMA in, it outputs JAMA out, as well as splits the signal so that you could pull that off for a capture card. There have been a few in talks, but at the moment, I think they're all in the same scenario that you're discussing now. You know, small runs of production on forums, so you either have to make it yourself or you have to jump on a group buy or something like that. That's actually something that I've been talking to a few people about for a few years now, and the project keeps getting stalled for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's my fault that the projects get stalled, but I would love to see that. I would love to see a mass-produced, reliable adapter that takes whatever JAMA signal comes in and spits that out unchanged, and also has some kind of video and audio circuit where you could pull that off for capture. And I don't know when something like that would be available, but I want one too. So definitely watch the site, because as soon as something's out there, I'll have some news on it. Next, can you recommend any SVideo switches? It's their preferred connection for consoles. So much like I talked about before, I would just look into older high-end equipment, stuff that used to be insanely expensive, 20 years ago, that you could probably find in a junk bin on eBay for just a few dollars. Products like Extron are always good to look at, but there's a few other higher brands. Audio Authority, if I'm remembering correctly, might be another one. So I would just find high-end stuff like that. And depending on your setup, like I discussed before, you might be able to get converters to just cable adapters to use them through another switch if you already own a different switch. 3, I've been looking into getting a Mister, but can't find the config to use with SVideo on their site. Is it an external product I have to buy, or maybe out of stock? So just like I discussed before, there are those converters that can convert RGB or VGA to SVideo, as long as it's a 15 kilohertz signal. So basically, you could just get a Mister, use the VGA out, and convert it that way. That should be fine. But there's also another Mister device out there that has the conversion built in, which should be arriving to me today. So expect within a few weeks more info. If you're in a rush, just get a Mister with an I/O board and get one of those converters I talked about before. Same caveats, SVideo should work fine. I haven't done extensive testing, but it should, and composite won't. And if you can wait a little while longer, wait for probably going to be a written review to pop up on RetroRGB to see the other solution. And lastly, is there any magic SVideo tech on the way? I love SVideo. The one cool thing that's an internal mod only is an SVideo mod for the PC Engine and TurboGrafx that gets the correct colors processed out. There were actually a few different people working on it. I'm not sure who's going to have the solution first, but I'll be posting about all of them. I don't know I think one might be open sourced and one might be closed source, or maybe they're both open. I don't really know. But that was certainly the one that stood out. And it was actually funny because Voltar was talking about this. And as is very common with anything Voltar related, everybody seemed to misunderstand what he was saying. And his point that he was trying to make on Twitter, which trying to make a point in 240 characters is near impossible anyway, but his point is SVideo is absolutely awesome. It's a great signal, and it's kind of echoing what I've been saying for years, in that, if you're playing on a CRT, any signal's great. I mean, if you're playing on a flat panel, the better the signal, the clearer the experience is going to be with less noise. So RGB or component would be the best. SVideo is very, very, very close. And then composite on a flat panel, unless you have a really good comb filter, it's not going to be the best experience. So that's kind of what he meant, and I think a lot of people misunderstood and thought that he said SVideo is better than RGB, or it's the same, or something else, and that kind of sparked a whole weird thing on Twitter, which I very deliberately ignored and wanted no part of. But I agree. I think SVideo is amazing, and I think It's often overlooked because people either get a CRT with just composite video inputs and leave it at that, which is an awesome solution, or they kind of go the distance and try to find a PVM with RGB inputs in there. But I agree, SVideo is incredible, and if you could find a PVM or any kind of professional monitor with SVideo input, your experience is going to be so close to RGB you might not care at all anyway. So the only other SVideo tech on the way would be that isn't already out there. I mean, there's a million good things for SVideo, but the only new stuff that isn't out yet is the stuff for the PC Engine, and probably some more of these converters going around like I was just discussing. Ben Morrison just picked up a projector with RGBS inputs, and it seems to work fine with the Sega Genesis plugged directly in, but not a Super Nintendo. So there's a couple of different factors that could be involved in this. The first is, how are you getting it from RGB to BNC? Are you using just a pass-through connector? Are you using a device with a powered sync stripper or anything like that? And the reason I'm asking is because specifically of sync. Now, this is a tricky thing because if you get it wrong, you could damage equipment. So I would first start by finding the manual or maybe even service manual for this projector and seeing exactly what sync is required. Is it 75 ohm? Is it TTL level? Do they have voltage specs? And I would kind of just go from there and see. And if it requires higher level sync, you might need something like going into an Extron RGB interface. Those are super cheap, but that basically just converts sync to whatever you need. If sync's too high, you would need to add a resistor to that adapter. And the other problem it could be is that sometimes Super Nintendos just aren't compatible with certain displays. That's why you've probably heard of things like the dejitter mod and people that are using an open source scan converter. And if that's the case, you might have to use a scaler, but then you would have to check to make sure that that projector could also accept 480p. So if it's 15 kilohertz only, I would try SVideo or composite video and kind of just see if there's anything you could do. But if it's not sync related, the only other thing you could do is use like a RetroTink or a Rad2X to go to 480p, and then just go direct. You'd probably have to have a HDMI to component converter or HDMI to VGA at that point, but then you would be able to go in that way. And of course, you could always do upscaler and then downscaler, but that's getting a little bit crazy, I would think. So first, you would want to determine, is sync the issue? And next, then, if it's not the issue, then you'd have to step and start testing other consoles, see what's more compatible or not. My gut's telling me it's a sync thing, but you're definitely going to want to be careful about that, because if you send too much, or if you convert it wrong, or if you build a custom cable wrong, you could do some damage to the console or the projector. Frank Aguayo said years ago they were in the consumer electronics industry and Philips had monochromatic LCD touchscreen remote control called the Pronto. I remember that. When you pressed a series of buttons, it put the remote in game mode and Tetris would pop up. I know it's not exactly retro, but thought it was cool that Tetris was in the remote. Might be worth mentioning somewhere. Just an interesting tidbit in gaming history. Yeah, I definitely remember those. I remember those, and I also remember the ones that had like the Indiglo overlays that were cheaper but fully programmable. And then they also had a bunch of others that eventually replaced the Pronto with a full color touchscreen. I remember all of that stuff. I remember being fascinated by it. However, I also remember every single time I got one of those programmable all-in-one remotes, it never failed. At least once a week, I would have to get up and find another remote. It wasn't a full solution for all of them. And the funny thing is, usually it was when somebody else grabbed the remote and they didn't realize that you have to like keep holding it at all your equipment because it's accessing more than one thing at a time. So I ended up, right around the time of the Pronto, I just kind of gave up and never used more than one remotes. And I remember getting in a couple of fun, nerdy arguments with my dad about this because he loved the programmable remotes. And sure as shit, he would get one, and within 6 months, it would be, in a cabinet somewhere, and he would be back to just using multiple remotes for all the reasons I just complained about. So that is a pretty cool tidbit. Thanks for sharing. Maybe if I stumble across one of these days, I'll do like a fun little video on it or something. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these, and especially thanks to everybody that signs up for any of the support services, because it's your support that's keeping all of these videos, the research, and all the other craziness going. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.